He wants to set the stage for you. He wants you from the very first line, the very first paragraph, to understand that one of your calls to action as a reader is to think about not just this wonderful story you're about to engage in, but also the implications for the society in which you're living. And that is still very true today, which is one of the many things that makes it a great classic. Okay, I'm super excited today. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking to you about one of my very all-time favorite books, A Tale of Two Cities. And you need to watch this short video before you read it, because I have recommended this book to a lot of people. And what almost always happens is that they start reading the book and chapter 1 is like super confusing, and then 2 and 3 they feel a little bit lost, and then a lot of them just give up. And I don't want you to give up. I want you to keep reading. And I don't want you to be confused by what Dickens is doing, because he's doing something super intentional in this book. He is the creator, really, of the genre of the social novel. He wanted to reconcile the classes, and he wanted to create social reform through the novels that he wrote, the stories that he told. And, you know, he did this in a lot of his books, and this is, he's doing it again in this book, maybe not nearly to the extent of something like Oliver Twist, but definitely the themes, the ideas are still there. And so the first chapter, you expect to, you know, you've just picked up a novel, you expect to just head into a story. And just as a side note, the chapters are pretty short. So you're going to get through chapters. There's 3 books, and mine looks pretty thick, but it's only about 400 pages. And so as far as like classic novels go, it's not all that long. And there's 3 books, and so there's lots of chapters inside the book. So you get through the chapters really quick, which is kind of like, you know, emotionally rewarding. But the first chapter isn't very long, but you need to know that he's trying to do something really specific. So this is the famous line, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And so just imagine that you live at the time of Charles Dickens, and you're, you know, you're British, you're English, you live over there. And this is, you know, the 1800s. The French Revolution wasn't all that long ago, so it's like kind of fresh on your mind. And he wants there to be social reform through what he's writing. And so he has something to say to you as an English reader. He wants you to think about what the events that led up to, and then everything that went on during the French Revolution, he feels is something that could happen in his day, in the modern day Charles Dickens, you know, London, England. But the warnings that he makes and the kinds of things that he brings up in the novel is something very worth watching for, because they are themes of all like social revolution and unrest. They're the kinds of things that do cause social issues. And so they're definitely worth thinking about, even in a modern context. But if you're living then and you're getting this novel, he's titled it A Tale of Two Cities. Now, it's a love story, and it's a story of sacrifice, and it's a story about family, and it has many of the same traditional themes that Dickens is famous for, that we love about him, and you know, virtue and character and goodness and hard work. Those themes are all present. But what he also wants you to notice back then is how much England is like France was. And so he names it A Tale of Two Cities, because he wants it to be in the reader's mind that he's making a comparison between Paris and London. And he wants to warn the people of his day, look, this could happen to us, like it just barely happened just across the channel. We are not immune to the kinds of troubles and upheaval that France went through, and it was bloody and ugly and awful. And there are reasons that it happened, and we can avoid those reasons now if we're conscientious and diligent. And so the first chapter is all about that. And he says specifically, that, let me read you this little section where he talks about this comparison. He says, the period was so far like the present period. So France was like today, that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or evil in the superlative degree of comparison only. So he's just told you, for good or for evil, I'm going to make these comparisons. We are like, in many ways, France was and maybe still is in his mind. And so then the next paragraph is, there was a king with a large jaw and a queen with a plain face on the throne of England, and there were a king with a large jaw and a queen with a fair face on the throne of France. So he's going through like, look, here's the ways in which we're like France was. And then he talks about France, less favored on the whole as to matters spiritual than her sister of the shield and trident. And so he feels like France was less spiritual, less striving after, character and proper, having a proper relationship to God and all those things as England was. So he feels like that's helpful for England, but still there's all these things wrong in England. He cites, one of the comparisons he makes here is making paper money and spending it. And then he tells the story of how a youth was sentenced to have his hands cut off, his tongue torn out with pincers, and his body burned alive because he had not kneeled down in the rain to do honor to a dirty procession of monks who passed within his view. And again, just these comparisons between France and England. The paragraph before, he's mentioning like London, Westminster, Cock Lane. So he's throwing out these British places. Again, chapter 1 is not very long, just making comparisons. And then he has the last couple paragraphs are about all the trouble in England and how it's kind of like France. And he wants to set the stage for you. He wants you from the very first line, the very first paragraph, to understand that one of your calls to action as a reader is to think about not just this wonderful story you're about to engage in, but also the implications for the society in which you're living. And that is still very true today, which is one of the many things that makes it a great classic. And so he sets the stage for what England was like at the time, at the time, before the French Revolution. He tells us he's starting the novel out in 1775, and then it runs all the way through 1792, 3-ish. So he tells specifically about how much robbery there is. He talks about how you would have to remove all your furniture to a warehouse in order to go on vacation because people would come and steal your stuff. Or there were all these highwaymen, these robbers that staked out the roads, and at night they would, go into the coaches with guns and whatnot and steal things from the people, how just it wasn't safe. And then he says, and nobody thought any of these occurrences much out of the common way. So nobody thought a lot about it because it's just how things were and they were just used to it. But again, a precursor to the kind of social upheaval that happened later in France. And as a warning, he's starting out that way. And then chapter 2 is called The Mail. So this is a mail coach. And it's got three passengers on it. And so now here we are, we're starting into the story in chapter 2. And just imagine that you're in this place. He spends probably a couple pages describing the scene to really draw you in. And it's important that he's opening with this scene because it's kind of where you'll end up when you're in the French Revolution at the end. And it's an emotion that he's pulling you into, of kind of the weight and the heaviness and the seriousness of some of the themes. And there's a lot of light points. There's a lot of beautiful scenes, and there's humor, of course, because it's Dickens, and there's love and family love and courtship and those kinds of these. But this is the scene that you're drawn into first. It's November. It's cold out. These passengers are all wrapped up so much so that they would be unrecognizable to each other. You're headed to Dover, which is the city just on the coast across from Calais at the Channel, where you would head over to France. And so people that were heading over to France would be headed to Dover. And you're headed uphill, and it's been raining recently, and the road is so muddy that the horses can't pull the mail and the passengers. So you've been asked to exit the coach, and now you're trudging uphill in the freezing cold at night in the mud with, as he's let you know in the previous chapter, when there's highwaymen all around, you know, ready to come at you at any moment and rob you, and you don't know the people that you're traveling with, and so you're scared of everybody. You're scared of the passengers, you're scared of the highwaymen, you don't know what's going to happen, and so just be patient as he describes the horses, and he describes the coach, and he describes the passengers and the environment, because he really wants you to feel the mood of this. Cold, dark, dreary, scary. That's really the feeling of the French Revolution. And so then a horse approaches, and of course they pull out their gun, and they're ready to fire any second, and they, you know, tell the person, I'm going to fire if you don't tell me who you are, what you're coming for right now. And he's like, whoa, 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 I'm just a messenger. Do you have a passenger named Mr. Jarvis Lorry? And they're like, you know, is there one? Yes, yes, yes. And he recognizes the messenger's voice and calls out to him, is that Jerry? Yes, it's Jerry. And so you meet the first two characters, and Jerry and Mr. Jarvis Lorry have a relationship of business together. Now, Mr. Jarvis Lorry is a middle-aged bachelor, confirmed bachelor, never going to marry or have a family. And he's a man of business, and he is a banker. He has worked at Tellson's Bank all his life, and he is on a specific errand for the bank. And Jerry is a tradesman who sits outside the bank every day to run errands for whatever needs to be done. And you get to know him more. He enters the story more and more as time goes on. He brings his son with him, and they run errands for the bank. And so that's how Mr. Lorry knows Jerry. And so he says, okay, I just want to give you this simple message. And he says, okay, great. Be fast. And so he gives the message, because of course they don't trust him. They don't know who this guy is. They don't know if they have orchestrated some kind of like takeover of the whole mail coach. Like, they don't know. And so they're being very cautious, but they allow him to take the message from Jerry. And now we're like 4 or 5 pages into chapter 2. And the message is very simple. Wait at Dover for Mademoiselle. So Mademoiselle means a French woman who is unmarried. And he knows who he's going to meet. He's had a relationship. This is Mr. Lorry. He had a relationship with these people many, many years ago and has had no contact with them. And he's been sent to re-meet them because the bank handles the finances of this particular woman. And he is on an errand to help this woman. And so this is really, really important. Mr. Lorry gives back the message, recalled to life. So the emotional tone of this chapter and this phrase, recalled to life, are super important to the novel. Look for the word recalled. It comes up several times, and look for the themes of life and death. They're all over the place, over and over and over again. Reasons for living, and what's worth living for, and what's worth dying for, and who's dead and who's alive, and why they're dead and why they're alive, and who's really actually living and who's just existing. And so he gives back this message. They get to the top of the hill. Everybody gets back into the coach, and we head into chapter 3. And in chapter 3, it's kind of like a dedication to this theme. We get a description of Jerry, and we get a description of Mr. Lorry, because they're key characters in this story that he's bringing us into. But we also spend time with them as they kind of ruminate and ponder about this message that Mr. Lorry has sent. So on his way home, Jerry is just thinking what a strange message this is and why it's so weird. And so in this way, through these two characters, Dickens is like bringing this message home. He's like reinforcing, recalled to life is a theme I want you to pay attention to. This is very, very important in what we're going to talk about in this story. And then for Mr. Lorry, he is trying to recall. So I'm going to do a little tiny bit of a giveaway about the first 3 or the first 4 or 5, I guess it's in chapters maybe 6 that you meet Dr. Manette, and I'm just going to give you enough of a, like, give you enough information about him. And I'm not going to, it's not a spoiler. It's not going to spoil the story for you, but it will just make it easier to understand what's going on. So in chapter 3, Mr. Lorry is having this conversation with himself. Now they've gotten back in the carriage and they're finishing their drive to Dover, and he's kind of in and out of sleep. And he's walking and he's writing, and these words are going on through his mind, and he's trying to remember the person that he's going to meet. And he can't remember his face. He can't recall his face. He would be about 45 years old. And then he has this kind of pseudo conversation in his mind with this person, this mysterious person that he is recalling to life. And he says, it goes like this: buried how long? The answer was always the same, almost 18 years. You had abandoned all hope of being dug out? Long ago. You know that you are recalled to life? They tell me so. I hope you care to live? I can't say. Shall I show her to you? Will you come and see her? So what's going on here is that Mr. Lorry has been given an errand of going to meet a young lady named Lucy. And after he has this conversation with himself 2 or 3 times in chapter 3, the chapter ends with, to be buried alive for 18 years, because she believes that her father has been dead all her life. And actually, he's been a prisoner in the Bastille for almost 18 years. So she's just over 18 years old, 18, 19, and he's meeting up with her. He's to wait until she shows up, and then he has to tell her that her father is in fact alive and that they're going to see him. And so she thinks that she's going because she's come of age, that they're going to reconcile her inheritance, which is part of it, which is the reason why Mr. Lorry is involved, because the bank handles their finances. But it's much more than that. And it's really endearing when you read in chapters 4 and 5, when he has these conversations with her, because he's so mindful of how difficult this is going to be for her, but he doesn't, he just keeps telling her, it's just business. It's just business, Miss Minette. It's just business, because he's a man of business and he doesn't consider himself a very emotional creature, and he doesn't know how to handle this emotional conversation he has to have with her. And she's starting to cry, and he's like encouraging her not to cry. And it's really sweet, this interchange that they have. And so he lets her know that they're going to now head into Paris, and they're going to meet up with her dad, and she's going to be introduced to him, and they're going to bring him home, and then he's going to be able to live with her. And she doesn't know what kind of state he's in. She can't even imagine what kind of man he's become, shut up in solitary confinement for almost 18 years. And so then they head to Paris, and the rest of it, in this little introductory section, you meet Dr. Minette, and he's been retrieved and cared for by a couple named the Defarges, who own a wine shop in Paris. And they are also very important to the plot. And so pay attention to the wife and to her knitting and to their interchanges with each other and how this couple works together, and to this group of people that he calls Jacques that he's working with, that go up to see Dr. Minette. There's reasons for this. There are seeds being planted. It's the end of 1775, and he's showing you the seeds that are being planted for the French Revolution to eventually, a decade later, start to unfold. And so they go up there, they meet up with the father, and he is totally detached from the world and doesn't know how to engage and all of that. And so book 1 starts there, and you meet the key players, the key characters in this story. You understand a little bit about their relationship to each other and what you're headed into and what you can expect to find. And then, just looking forward a little bit, book 2 is going to open 5 years later, and then another year is going to go by, and then as book 2 goes on, another about decade passes. So book 2 lasts over a period of about 12-ish years. And then book 3 opens up with and most of book 2, there's some scenes in France. It's back and forth between France and London. I guess pretty much all of it is. But then book 3 takes place mostly in France. And the French Revolution is in full swing, and all of that is going on. So I just want to encourage you to look for these themes of living and dying, dead and alive. Pay attention to the alcoholic who bolsters another person's career while he's just wasting his life away. Look for the honest tradesman by day who's also a grave digger by night. Look for the aristocrat who gives up a life of pleasure to live a more honest, noble one somewhere else. Look for characters that are revived and reasons why people want to live and want to die, and how all of those themes play out. I hope that introduction to A Tale of Two Cities helps you manage those first few chapters really seamlessly. If you don't get everything that's going on, don't worry about it. And as you keep reading, over time, this older language and the dialogue will get easier to understand. It's something that you do have to get acquainted with, but it becomes easier as you get further into the novel. And then, of course, the more you read classics, the easier it becomes. But it is a very beautiful book for many, many reasons. I know quite a bit about the French Revolution, and so if you care about history very much at all, then that will be really fascinating to you as well, because you meet the common people that were the driving force behind it, and they're alongside these other main characters, and as their lives intertwine. And of course, like a traditional Dickens, you know, there's connections that you don't see up front, and people come back into the story later, and their lives cross, and it's all connected in the end. But it's a beautiful story. It's funny, it's deep, it's meaningful, it's beautiful, about friendship and about family and about real, meaningful, eternal kinds of love and sacrifice. So I hope you really enjoy it as much as I do. Please, if this was helpful, let me know in the comments below. If you've read this book and loved it, tell me what you loved so much about it in the comments. I'd love to hear how you feel about A Tale of Two Cities, because I absolutely adore it. I don't know if it's in my top 5 or my top 10, but it's somewhere there at the very, very top for a myriad of reasons. But enjoy the book. Let me know how it goes for you. And I will see you next time.